We're very lucky to kick off the show tonight by someone who's been on the front lines of a lot of the debate in Washington these last few months, whether it's the Homeland security debate, where Democrats often have put American security at risk, even in the midst of a military operation in Iran, or on the very important Section 702 FISA renewal issues that are up now. How are we going to protect Americans' privacy from future spying? A very important debate. He also got a 100% rating recently as a conservative from the Heritage Action Foundation, one of the most respected members in Congress from the great state of Texas, Congressman Michael Cloud. He joins us right now. Congressman, great to have you in the show.
Thank you. Good to be on with you. Great analysis.
There is a lot of, thank you. Yeah, well, it's a great honor to have you on. There is a lot of movement in these final hours. The sand clock's ticking down. There's a request from Pakistan for a delay. President Trump saying heated negotiations, not sure how they're going to turn out. Give us your assessment 2 hours from that deadline of where you think we are and what's still possible before 8 p.m. Eastern.
Well, you have to give some deference to the White House. They're the ones in the negotiation, and they're the ones looking at the tactical information day to day, boots on the ground, that kind of thing. I'll say, the administration and President Trump has demonstrated that the preference is for peace. They were in negotiations with Iran all the way up till the beginning of this conflict, and until it turned out that the people we were negotiating with at the time were not negotiating in good faith. They were just buying out time to create a conventional missile shield to continue to develop a nuclear weapon to be used against us or against Israel or anyone else who they would want to use it against. And so, you got to give a little, give them they're the ones with the knowledge of the boots on the ground in the moment, but the importance for the president to put pressure on Iran to come to a deal and for us to make sure that this doesn't continue to drag out for weeks and weeks and weeks, and that we accomplish our military objectives, we get Iran to heed to what needs to happen here is really, really important.
Yeah, no, it really is. There is some pretty clear evidence that some other powers have their finger in this U.S. Iran drink right now. China apparently helping with missile technology. There was discussions of a hypersonic missile transfer that was being discussed just before President Trump struck Tehran. And then Russia, which openly has admitted it's been giving some information on targeting. The fact that two of our superpower enemies are, at least through proxies, trying to meddle here, how does that factor into the equation? And does China and Russia walk away from this conflict a lot more diminished because we've really prevailed thus far militarily?
I think so, and I think that's one of the important points of what's going in Iran that oftentimes gets overlooked in the discussion, and that's us looking at this at the larger geopolitical scale. Sometimes we look at these incidences in their own stovepipe, so to speak, but when you look at Venezuela, when you look at what's going on in Iran, all this is posturing against China and isolating China and removing strengths to their apparatus. And so the president inherited a world in which China was looking to invade Taiwan in 2027, just a few months from now, in a sense, and they build 80% of the chip capacity in the United States. And so that would be detrimental to our military, not to mention to everybody's cell phone, their cars, everything else that we deal with in our society, in a modern society. So this has been very important in causing China to pause and to rethink about that timeline and those ambitions. And even if all it does is buy us a few years so that we can onshore manufacturing, so that we can shore up supply chains, so that we can rebuild and continue to rebuild our military, it's important that we have that window of opportunity. So, yes, we need to look at these instances for what they are in their own sense, but we also need to look at Iran, Venezuela, all these in the geopolitical landscape of what the president's really working on.
Yeah, it's pretty clear it's a four-dimensional chess game, and there are lots of progress that the American interests have made in the last year that were in reversal when President Trump took over. So there's a lot of progress, and it does seem like we're in a much stronger position. I want to get to two thorny issues that are probably at the negotiating table. One is, how do we come to trust and verify any promise that Iran makes, given their 47-year history of hostility towards the United States, Israel, the Middle East, basically Western civilization? And two, what are we to do about that highly enriched uranium? It's buried under the ground right now thanks to our bombers. But how do you think those two potential issues could play out in a negotiation?
Yeah, certainly those are going to be points of negotiation, and I'm certain they are. We would have to have some sort of, you said it, trust but verify. We'll need people that we can negotiate with that have not displayed lack of trust in the past. So people who are negotiating in good faith. With that is going to have to come the verification point where we can go in or others can go in and inspect what's going on, continued inspections to make sure that they're not working on restarting a nuclear program. And as well, we've got to figure out how to get that out of Iran, that nuclear material out of Iran, and there's ways to do that, whether that's us, whether that's someone else. It seems like we're going to be the ones best capable to do that as far as the people that we trust. But, right. That's all going to be part of the negotiation. But ultimately, we have to have people that are wanting a different future and a different vision for Iran and the region and the world at large.
So I want to turn to an issue that Congress has before it, deadline ticking, I think April 20th or approximately. A decision on the Section 702 sort of NSA monitoring program. There were some reforms made a year ago. Some people don't think they go far enough, or it's a good start, but more to be done. Where are we in that debate? Right. Will Americans get more protections, or will the system that was put in about a year ago persist for a little bit longer until we study it?
Well, we need to get the reforms that the American people have been wanting for quite some time, and now's the window to get that done. We've had some discussions on the Hill, and there's some saying, well, it's the right thing to do to get more protections for the American people in, but it's just not the right time. Well, I've right. yet to be in the discussion where you're going to get the briefing from the intelligence community or any single agency where they come into you and say, we have too much power, we have too much money, we'd like to give some back. That's only going to happen when the representatives of the American people demand it. And so it's really a time for us to go in and demand it. For me, I'm looking at a few things. We want a warrant requirement. That needs to be a part of the discussion. The Fourth Amendment, not for sale, needs to be a key component. And that's where we have our intelligence apparatus to, instead of if there's information on American citizens that they otherwise would need a warrant for, and they don't want to, they just go around and purchase that from data brokers. And some would say, well, what's the difference? Insurance companies can buy it. Well, insurance companies can't put you in jail. So it's important we have these protections. And then one that's really important to me is a ban on the central bank digital currency. And the reason why it's in this conversation is that, and we're not concerned about the Trump administration misusing this, but future administrations could turn that into a surveillance tool and a tool of control against the American people. And so it's important for these to be a part of that conversation as we look on how to extend the FISA authorities, which, are supposed to be going after foreign. It's meant to be a way for us to surveil foreign right. entities that would be threats to the United States. So we want to do the right thing and be able to protect the Americans, but we want to protect their civil liberties as well.
Yeah, maybe close that back door into American surveillance that has been opened over the last decade or so. When you look out the last few years, you have been one of the driving forces in rooting out, I think, one of the great cancers in American society, DEI. You, J.D. Vance, paired up on legislation in 24. A lot of progress has been made since President Trump came in office, but the left keeps trying to rebrand it. They call it something else, and you catch a college doing the same thing, just under a different name. Where are we in the fight against DEI and its incredibly corrosive effect on our young people? And what are the next tools we're going to need to make sure it becomes fully dormant?
Well, we're still working to get that legislation passed in Congress. Yeah. Thankfully, we have an administration, and obviously with J.D. Vance being the original Senate co-sponsor on it back when he was in the Senate, this administration is clear about we need to build a society built on merit, and DEI not being the determinant in all these discussions. And so we've worked to weed that out of our agencies. That's, of course, obviously an ongoing process. The way this has worked its way to weave its way into our governments, our agencies, our institutions throughout society, it takes a lot of work. And like you said, a lot of universities, they just rebrand it. Well, it's going to take us being vigilant. The thing that's that is happening, though, that we see is the young people, the next generation in America is pushing back on it. And so for us being able to introduce legislation like this and to have an administration who's being bold about really the virtue of building a society built on merit and character and all those things that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about and that we've aspired to be as a nation, this generation is pushing back on the DEI, the woke, the rhetoric, and coming back to these traditional values that have worked to make the United States the wonderful country that we've become. And so, the work still needs to be done. We need people vigilant to make sure this isn't happening in their local schools and universities to continue to push back on it. And then we need to continue the work of making sure that bill gets across the finish line.
One more before he let you go. I thought you did a really important service for all of us just before the Easter break when the Senate sent a bill that looked like a deal to reopen DHS, and you dug into it a little bit, and you found something pretty remarkable that was taken out of it, funding for the units that protect our children against these heinous child traffickers, these sex traffickers, the human traffickers. How could a Senate cut that level out? And who's behind that sort of notion that letting traffickers flourish is a good idea?
Oh my gosh, the idea that the Senate and specifically the Senate Dems don't want our homeland protected, aren't willing to fund it, even though this was the #1 priority during the election, the American people are clear about this. And then we're not going to fund the people who are going after child sex traffickers. After the last administration lost 300,000 kids, thankfully, President Trump, his administration has found a bunch of them, but there's still a lot more work that needs to be done there. It's just atrocious, their priorities, and anything they can do to run out the clock on the Trump administration, they're willing to do, even if it means hurting kids. And that we cannot acquiesce to that in the House. We've got to push back on that. And thankfully we sent that bill back. They sent it back to us, so right now we've still got some work to do, but that's got to be a line that we're not willing to cross.
Yeah, so very important. Before we let you go, just real quickly, when we wake up in the morning, what's your guess? Bombs away or a temporary pause?
Well, I'm praying for peace, like so many people. I'd hate to. It's such a serious matter. I don't want to game it, but you hope we get to a point where at least we can buy some time, that Iran makes the concessions that need to happen to at least, this is about going after their rogue, evil government. The Iranian people are for this, and that's been the hesitation to leave all this infrastructure in place as best as possible. But at some point, we got to close the chokehold on this administration in Iran. So hopefully cooler heads will prevail. They've been an enemy
of the United States. Yeah, that leadership has hated us, and they've hated Western civilization. That's really been their quest
to terrorism. Right.
Yeah. Well, this is an incredible moment to finish the job one way or the other. Congressman, always great to have you on the show. We love when you join us, and thanks for all the great work you've been doing on DEI. When I talk to people on the Hill about that issue, your name comes up every time because you've been so dedicated to it. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you.